Thank you very much, Bryan. Yeah. So if Bryan and Joseph, if you could sit up here. Yes, Christine Buckley. Yeah, Christine Buckley was an amazing woman. The fact that she did so much to raise issues around institutional abuse was absolutely historic. But one of the things that struck me with all the work that she did is that, you know, she fought for justice for people in institutions and abuse. But one of the things that the redress board and the institutions fail to recognise is that there is such abuse called racism. And in all of the abuses that they looked at, psychological, they looked at physical, sexual, they never looked at a race. And that's a travesty. But I think we have something going on today in Ireland called the Mother and Baby Homes investigation, which luckily have decided to include within the legislation something about race, and I'm really delighted that at least they're investigating that. And I think it does mean that we're moving on as a country. We're recognising that actually racism is a scourge that needs to be dealt with in Ireland. So for now, what I'd like to do is pass it over to question and answers. It's an informal session. If you've got any questions for Bryan or Joseph on the contributions, please feel free to ask them. Don't be afraid, don't be shy. Okay, Austin?
Yeah, sorry. Well, trying to get everybody asking questions. Trying to encourage everybody as well. I'm Austin Harley from South East Regional TSC Race Relations Committee. And just an important point to bring to everybody's attention. 2 years ago, there was an exhibition at the Barbican, a black human slave, and there was a massive protest. I was invited to speak as an Irish actor speaker and to give our support to the black community then at that time. Only last year, there was one in Galway. It was absolutely disgraceful. Loads of black actors through it and only found out at the last minute. We had to circulate the information as far and wide. So the general question is, should we demand an apology from the actual Museum of Cultural Arts who allowed that black human slave to take place in Galway, the Human Zoo exhibition? And if not, should we be demanding one as soon as possible? So that's just a question I want to throw over. Sorry, Conrad, maybe and what people might think, and what themselves might think as well. So
do you remember that? That was last summer, wasn't it?
That's right, 2015.
Yeah, and I think they did. Was some South African guy who did a tour around various different European countries, and obviously there was an uproar in the UK, but it was very muted in Ireland. I do remember that. I mean, is this something that the arts? What part does the arts play in anti-racism? Because in a sense, I think his argument was that actually through art we can actually raise these issues. But I know Fintan O'Toole, one of the leading writers in Ireland, actually supported that, which I was quite surprised. So, what are your views on how art can contribute to ridding us of racism or trying to raise issues? Any views?
I don't have a definite answer on that one, I'm afraid. I mean, art can do something. I mean, art can do so much to help us understand how we might think about the world, but I don't think we can go beyond engaging with representations and portrayals. I think these are elements of a conversation. I didn't follow that particular case well. It wasn't, in my recall, big news, although certainly for people who do care about it, it is the biggest news of all. I think people are perfectly right to campaign about and engage with these kinds of things. Also to raise questions as to, say, for example, whether the statue of Cecil Rhodes should be left standing or not. I think it's more important to have the debate than to take down the statue. I would be uncomfortable about sometimes taking down the statues. The Leopold statue was a very good one. Somebody vandalised that one. I'm not too sure how I feel about vandalising artworks, but one can understand it, and one can. The Germans have a word for it. We can perhaps get something positive from the fact that people are engaging with this and using even bad art or bad representations as documents that allow us to interrogate the very bad things that happen. So sometimes when somebody does a really stupid thing, sometimes when somebody does a really crass thing, in a strange kind of way, they're giving us an opportunity to have a conversation or a debate. I think the debate's important.
Yep.
I was going to ask you, what part, given that Ireland is a country that has lost, through migration, a large parts of its population, what part do you think that loss affects racism in Ireland? Because you're talking about how London came to terms with racism and all the good stuff that happened in the 80s and 90s, and almost that can be transplanted to Dublin. But England has never been a country that has lost that many people. And it's a bit of a big question, this, isn't it? But I just wondered how loss influences race in Ireland.
I think there's a tendency in Irish debates to think in terms of large amounts of migration out, and often a sense that this is not migration people wanted to undertake, but in a sense they were forced migrants, especially in the famine era and so on and so forth. So people went who did not want to go.
Yeah, exactly.
So therefore, basically, we should have empathy with and understanding of people who come. I think at a certain rhetorical level that plays out, but I think there are serious limits to that beyond that kind of fairly obvious association. Going to the English thing briefly, millions of people from Britain were immigrants also. Millions of people from Scotland emigrated to the United States and elsewhere. People from London were transported to Australia as convicts.
But not in the percentage.
But not in the percentages. But Ireland has a very unusual case insofar as it hemorrhaged very, very large numbers of people in the 19th and 20th centuries in particular, to such an extent that it actually reduced the size of the population of the country from around 8 million at its peak to just little over 2 million by the 1960s. So this was an ongoing hemorrhage. I think at a certain level, this certainly appeals to some people, to some writers, to some artists who are always making the kind of comment and association that you make. But I would also basically say at another level that the Irish are at least as complacent as anybody else when it comes to racism. The studies I have undertaken of racism in Dublin and others have undertaken find that the name-calling and hate talk and hate speak and the harassment and antisocial behaviour and the bullying happens in Dublin just as it happened in British cities. And the Irish police have little or no clue as to what's going on, just as the British police had little or no interest in solving or addressing these things many decades ago. And that we have a huge lesson to learn, that we can't just instead have some sort of symbolic representation of our own immigration as the answer to all of this. That's a sort of a trick that just won't get us out of the hard work of actually listening to the stories of actual immigrants who've come to Ireland the last few decades, be they asylum seekers, bus drivers from Nigerian origin, or many, many others, or nurses who are Filipino, and many other peoples who are now working in Dublin just as they're working in London. Ireland has a very large immigrant population, most of it's recent, most of it's first generation. It's a huge change to make, and there's a huge job now of coming to terms with it. And whilst it is very good to symbolically draw on inclusive ideas of Irishness and to draw attention to the fact that Irish people were made welcome elsewhere, including in Britain, at the same time, that does not excuse or absolve us from the huge amount of hard work we need to do and the hard work that needs to continue everywhere to address racism, discrimination, and so on. I don't know if that answers your question.
No, not really. But I mean, it's a good answer.
Joseph has something to say.
Yes, Joseph.
Hello. Yeah, I did. I can't really comment that much on the current situation in Ireland because I've emigrated 30 years ago and I do go back quite often, but I don't live there, so I wouldn't be an expert by any means. But I wanted to look at the historical aspect of this. I mean, it is certainly true that huge waves of people left England and in fact, carried out genocide all over the place, Australia, various other places, Africa, wherever. But I think there is an issue here, going back to Casement, of the type of state that emerged in Ireland in 1921, and I think if you had a conversation with the ambassador a few months ago, and he said that Casement is probably the only one of the leaders of 1916 who has an afterlife, that the rest of them are almost frozen in their graves. It's an interesting comment, and I think for me, the type of state that emerged, minus Casement and minus Connolly, because I think the two leaders of 1916 who had a more international vision were Casement and Connolly. quite different in many ways, but also, you know, both anti-colonialist, both anti-imperialist, and so on. The type of state we ended up with was a very narrow Catholic state, mirrored by another state in the north, which was an equally sectarian, narrow Protestant state, and everything became boiled down to, you know, the Bluton Boden, the sort of, you know, the nationality, if you were real Irish or not Irish. I mean, even the attitude when I lived in Dublin in the 60s to Georgian architecture was, well, we might as well pull it down, it's nothing to do with us, it's from the English. Well, you know, despite the fact that Irish masons and so on had worked in it, there was this very, very narrow definition of Irishness, and I think that is linked as well with the sort of things we see now emerging.
Thank you. Sean, you had a question?
I was just, the way you're talking, like that there's so much work to do, and I acknowledge that, but you assume, or you've been implying that we're much far further ahead in this country, and we're actually not. We've actually taken quite a few steps backwards. So I actually think, you know, hey to you in Ireland, because I'm actually looking to you now, as someone in the UK who's worked for mixed race recognition. I think you've taken big steps in Ireland, very big steps.
I'd like to talk to you about that.
I think 70 human beings called the Association of the Mixed Race in Ireland, through their courage and bravery in coming forward with their stories, have made a huge contribution.
But it's also the recognition of people being willing to listen. Because I find, certainly in this country, we've got a big problem with terminology, so you can't get past that. They kind of like bog you down in it, and you can't actually sort out any real issues. But also, nobody wants to listen. They don't seriously want to listen. And when you get the problem with terminology, you get lost in lots of other groups, really. So you don't tend to sort out the problems that you need to sort out. And I think that the way you're doing things in Ireland, you know, I admire it. I'm looking on you and seeing some...
We've still got a lot of work to do for traveller ethnicity, even recognising travellers as an ethnic community.
But that's
the same side of it.
We have here in that mixed race people in this country are termed as mixed heritage, and travellers come under that title.
Okay.
So does anyone who comes from one country and goes to another.
Yes, yeah.
And it means that if you're actually trying to change the way that mixed race people are seen in this country, you can't, because it's all rooted into that. And that is happening in universities, in the state. It's not people on the street. People on the street have their own way, you know, they describe themselves as mixed, they know who they are. But the people who need to provide policy and funding and help, they'll tell you, you don't get no funding unless you use the term multiple heritage or mixed heritage. So then the people on the ground can't recognise, you know, what's out there for them.
In the Irish case, I'm sorry to disabuse you, but nobody gets any state funding of any kind. But the Irish state shut down its anti-racism body several years ago, and the only work that stutters along in it trying to acknowledge racism in our society is done entirely by NGOs. It is it's a very underdeveloped situation.
Just one quick question, one more question. The lady with the red cap.
It wasn't this question. It was just something just to add to what this gentleman said about the exhibition, and then just to add on. And it was just to say that as a black creative, that job was offered out to lots of black creatives and actors. And then we had the last year, we had the whole diversity thing, because remember, we're not offered so much other jobs elsewhere. So what Professor was saying about the conversation, it was important for the exhibition, in my opinion, for the exhibition to go ahead, to then ask the actors, the black actors, why did they choose to be involved and represent something from themselves from historical context. But you never get to hear those voices, you only get to hear the major creative voice. I'm just going to think, and I just wanted to add, just onto your point that you said about labels and these names and understanding racism. So it was just about, there's an element of everybody needing to understand and hear truth, because truth is uncomfortable, but we are still living in a society where people are switching off ears, meaning it didn't really affect me, or I've got a mixed race friend or black friend and they seem like they're okay, and not understanding that there's repercussions. But also tonight, and it's not a disrespect, I've heard the terminology Negro, coloured, black. These are the labels that feed into the racism feeling that we have in our stomach, because we're actually still afraid to say black or even say mixed because of the labels given to us. And in this day and age, people will still say coloured to you as a person, which is a racist term. So I think sometimes in racism there is an ignorance that has been passed on, and like you said, it's the higher it be, that tick boxes and stuff like that, then everybody gets used to calling people certain names that actually are not right.
Thank you. I think we're going to have to
terminology.
we're going to have to leave it there.
Sorry,
That's the last point. Okay, so we're going to take a break.